Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 and members of council are assembled. If you're ready to begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Don. We'll call to order this regular council meeting and welcome all members of the public who are with us here in the chambers this evening, everyone watching us via the live stream at home, and welcome all members of the committee. Glad everybody's here. Just a brief public service announcement before we get started. I know we've made recently made some changes to our camera setup here in the council chambers. So those watching online will have seen some changes, and of course it's meant some changes for folks in attendance in person as well. And just wanted to note that while we're getting used to that new equipment, that staff are refining how the meeting is live streamed, which involves a lot of trial and error. So we appreciate everybody's patience while we figure out how this new system works, and really just making the comment that if folks have feedback about how the setup is working both at home or in person here in the council chambers, make sure to give us that feedback through the clerk at saugeenshores.ca. It's clerk@saugeenshores.ca is the email address for the clerk. So we'd really welcome and appreciate any feedback folks have so we can make things better. Okay, so that moves us then on to our second item on the agenda, which is the land acknowledgement, and Councillor Davinsky has that this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which consists of the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nation. We understand this land holds immense significance to the people of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We appreciate those who live and work alongside us today and who continue the traditions of their ancestors as stewards of the land we are privileged to inhabit. We thank them for the contributions they have made in both caring for the land and in shaping this community. We commit to truth and reconciliation, to acknowledge the truth about what happened to Indigenous peoples because of colonization, and to reconciliation, which begins with each and every one of us. And personally, I'd just like to remind everyone that Indigenous Day, National Indigenous Day is coming up and should be respected by everyone. June 21st, I believe, is the date. And it gives you time to reflect on what the Indigenous people mean to you and how we can work together. As a local government and public organization, we are dedicated to learning about Indigenous culture, to fostering a better relationship with First Nations and their people, and we commit ourselves to actions that move us forward on a path to healing, along with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we're on to disclosures of pecuniary interest. Ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. On to item 4, additions, deletions, and amendments. We do have one amendment to the agenda, which is the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation comments attachment for item 9.2, and there is a resolution. The council received the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation comments attached as an amendment to item 9.2. Is there a mover and seconder? Councillor Grace and the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? That's carried. I can't see Councillor Halpin anymore on the screens. I don't know if that's something that can be fixed. Thank you. Okay, so now we're on to, we have no minutes to adopt, no public meetings this evening, so we're on to close to public, and I have a resolution. The council move into a closed public session to discuss matters in accordance with the Municipal Act 2001, Section 2392E, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality. And so I'll ask for mover and seconder. Moved by Davinsky, seconded by Grace. All in favor? That's carried. So we'll move into closing the. I believe council is leaving the room. We're heading to the committee room. So you guys are welcome to stay, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Resume the regular council meeting. Is there mover and seconder? Moved by Grace, seconded by Stack. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, so and I will report that council gave direction to staff with regard to the litigation or potential litigation regarding an Ontario Land Tribunal matter. Okay, so now we're moving on to reports of the Committee of the Whole. And the first is a planning report on local official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications for L 2023-002 and Z 2023-009 for Slola at 570 Johnson Avenue. And we'll turn it over to our planner for the report.
Thank you. The purpose of the application this evening is to seek a site-specific zoning provision to allow for high-density residential building in the core commercial zone. The amendment would also recognize the current setbacks for the existing single detached dwelling and a reduced rear yard setback and lot area. It would also recognize an increased front yard setback, reduced parking requirements, and reduced setback between the parking area and the street for the proposed apartment building. A zoning bylaw amendment and local official plan amendment are required to increase the maximum permitted density for the apartment building from 90 units per hectare to 120 units per hectare. The applications were presented at a public meeting on April 17th. Comments were received from members of the public and committee. Some members expressed concern over the density in the proposal. Compatibility, privacy, parking, and traffic were also among some of the main issues raised. The applicant has since amended the proposal to address some of the concerns. An updated rendering of the project was circulated just prior to the meeting this evening. If approved, the applications would facilitate the development of a 12-unit apartment building. With respect to density, the number of units remains the same, but the density has decreased. The applicant has increased the lot area for the proposed apartment building, which has reduced the density from 153 units to 120 units per hectare. The applicant's 3-story proposal is in keeping with the current and permitted building heights in the area. There were concerns raised relating to the daycare across the lane and privacy. These uses are separated by a lane and the parking area. If required, the town can also request additional visual screening between the proposed development and the adjacent residential use through the site plan control process. With the recent revisions to the proposal, the applicant no longer requires relief from lot coverage. The applicant has increased parking on the site. All but 2 required parking spaces are now proposed to be provided on site. Due to the changes, the property with the dwelling no longer meets the lot size requirement, and the relocated accessory building requires relief from the rear yard setback. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there is a recommendation the council adopt bylaw 53/2023 for local official plan amendment L 2023-002 and that it be forwarded to county council for approval, and that council approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 2023-009 and bylaw 54/2023. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the Vice Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Davinsky. Questions or comments? The Vice Deputy Mayor will come to Grace after that.
So, Mr. Mayor, can we move right to comments about the changes? And
Yeah, this is just a decision meeting here, so you go right ahead.
I'm going to be supporting this application. I'd like to thank the developer. I think there's some good positive changes here. We've moved some parking off of Waterloo and limiting to 2, and the reshifting of the garage and lesser units. And I think he's listened. I think the developers have listened. I think the process has worked in this case, where there's been some positive changes. The only comment I want to make is, and I'm glad the developer's here, because I took a drive around to, one of the concerns I have sometimes with developers is they shove a round peg into a square peg into a round hole, I should say, get that backwards. In that some of the developments are really tight and I think landscape really suffers. And I know we'll get to site plan control later and talk about this, but I'm glad the developer's here to hear what I have to say about this, because I drove by and they're very nice units. And I think it's Catherine Street between Bricker and Godridge, those 8 new units. We got that right? Nice looking building. 8 new rental units brought onto the market. I think it's 8. And it's a tight site. And the landscape in there is, that lot, not a lot of greenery. And
See, he's talking. I can't hear. It was working before.
I'll just, do you want me to carry on?
That's for me.
So,
Okay.
and can we speak directly to the developer today? That's what I thought. But I'm glad he's here. They're here. So I support the recommendation. I think they've listened. It's worked the public process. And but when we get to site plan control, I would ask of the planner, Jay, let's try and green it up. I just think we're getting too tight with some of our developments, and green space suffers. And I don't think that's the way it should be. And again, against those units on Catherine. I think they're great units, but let's get some landscaping done at site control, Jay. I think it's important to green it up there.
Okay, thank you. So I got Grace next, and then I'll come to the deputy mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to speak long because I'm also supporting this, and I echo the comment of Vice Deputy Mayor. I just really appreciate the developer making those changes, relocating the garage, taking care of our concerns about using the road allowance for parking. So thank you very much. And thanks for being so flexible.
Thank you, the deputy mayor.
Thank you. And through you, I have comments that I hope might be taken into account as site planning continues. I much appreciate the changes that came following the previous meeting. The change in parking in particular was something that I had spoke about. I would like to think, though, that this removal of on-street parking, that the removal of the stalls, let's call them, along Waterloo Street, that it becomes obvious. So there's not, because the 1 and 4, which are what are marked on the rendering, those are quite long distances. So there's definitely room in there for more than 1 car. So if they're intended to just be 2 parking spaces, I would ask that the town do what it can do to rebuild or renovate that stretch of Waterloo Street on the side of the road to make it really obvious that there really are only 2 additional parking spaces there. I think the retained lot takes care of itself in that, the new driveway with the garage moved, the road allowance, it's going over the road allowance, and it appears from the rendering that, or the design drawing, that there's room for additional parking on a pad. I'm hopeful that that's not right over top of the road allowance there, but certainly the 2 that are intended to be on Waterloo Street. 1 is actually directly adjacent to the severed lot because of the L shape now. So, in many ways, that's a good decision to have an additional parking space, because at least it's connected to that particular property. The other one, number 1 on the rendering, is not connected to the parcel that the parking is intended for, I think. So I would just respectfully ask that we do what we can do to make sure that it's very obvious that there's only 2 defined off-street in the road allowance parking spaces there. I will ask questions outside of the meeting about what fees have to be paid for that, because I'm concerned about this in perpetuity with giving up road allowance parking to anybody for a very specific price. I don't know if we can do this, but rental agreements for apartments, and it's great that there's apartments being constructed, but we're setting up that those apartments really only have access to one parking space. And I think if there's some way that we can encourage that there be publicity that there is no on-street parking from here to here because of snow removal situations, and that each of those units really only has one attached parking space, I think that that's information that would be helpful in terms of people understanding what they're getting into. I also, just for the benefit of a site plan, there's a very specific reference in the updated planning report addendum. It was on page 7, and it talked about 7 of 13. It talked about a vegetative buffer to the south. If my geography is correct, that would be the south, I believe, faces the laneway. The property owner that was here and spoke about their interest in this development, they were to the east. So following what the Vice Deputy Mayor said about landscaping around the building, the property owner to the east did express some concerns. So I appreciate the comment about a vegetative barrier or buffer to the south. I just hope that we do what we can do to get landscaping in lots of locations around there that impact neighbors, but also make the streetscape look pretty. There's a comment about the retained lot, so that where the existing house is, even with the garage moving to that location, it's indicated that the landscaped open space is 54%. That's amazing. That over half the lot is landscaped open space. I suspect that that's a bit of a typo. It's the chart is on page 8 of 13 in the updated planning report. I do, with some reservations, a little bit, recognize that I'm going to support the application. I do appreciate the changes that were made. I still think there's going to be an issue with parking. I do like, though, that most of it has been moved onto the property itself. I would just ask that we do what we can do to make sure that public parking on the street, and you know, whether or not it's signed as specific to that building or not, I think it should be very clearly delineated, as it is in other places where there's wonderful hatch marks painted right on the asphalt to indicate this is a no parking area. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further comments from members? Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. And I apologize for the computer problems I've had. I restarted my computer and it seems to be working now. So anyhow, I think that this is, I'm pretty happy with what you've come back with for this plan. I'm glad that the parking is looked after. You have more open space now. And if I'm saying something that that was already said because I was having computer problems, I would just like to make sure that there's proper screening or something to help provide some shelter or some visible barrier between you and the school in the background behind. But otherwise, I think you've come back with a good plan. The previous plan, I wasn't happy with the parking. The parking's been looked after. There's more open space now. There's room for some nice landscaping to make it fit in with the character of the neighborhood. And as I've said, if we can't have developments like this in the core of the town, where else can we have them? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? I don't see any. I agree generally with the comments that have been made. I think it was obvious. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of concern with the zoning or official plan questions. There's some site planning related comments that have been made, which the developers are here, and I'm sure they're hearing. And certainly that's where my interest is at this point. Completely support the zoning and the official plan amendment. I think it'll be nice through our site plan agreement, which our staff will work on, to really codify that parking situation. I think this is a great opportunity. I think it's, it still requires 2 parking spaces on public land, but I think that there's a way to sort of accommodate that. And I think that's a way for us to sort of help make developments like this, which we badly need in this location, happen. We do need to do it on the basis of agreements, I think, because it's on public land, and we need to make sure we have a solid agreement in place to govern how that will work going forward. But I think that's a totally doable thing and something that I'm glad we're considering doing. So yeah, and actually I think that one nice thing is this resolves a larger parking issue that exists in that place. Years ago, it seems, along Waterloo Street in Port Elgin, many decisions were made to set up these kind of parking spaces along close to intersections where several cars could park. That happened in several places along Waterloo. I don't think it's particularly safe for traffic. I think it's not the best place, not the best way to configure parking. So we're remediating that in this case, which is great. Clean that up and make it better and make it safer. I think that's a real positive thing. So anyway, I certainly support the development. Looking forward to seeing these units get under construction and seeing people living in them. So if there's nothing further, you've heard the recommendation and I'll ask all in favor. That's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we're on now. Let me see if I can back to my agenda. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're on now to our second planning report, which is on the draft plan of subdivision for S 2022-007 East Hampton, the east side of Grenville Street North, and we'll turn it over to our planner to bring us that report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I am presenting tonight on a draft plan of subdivision application. The applicant is looking to develop 9 single detached dwelling lots and a future development block associated with that. This application was presented at a public meeting in December, and the applicant has taken comments and feedback from agencies and members of the public and council and has revised the proposal. More specifically, there are still 9 single detached dwelling lots proposed, but they are looking to provide additional residential units within a minimum of 2 of those single detached dwelling lots. The applicant has also amended the stormwater management design to include a stormwater management pond on the lands that the applicant owns to the north. That was the original intended location for the stormwater management pond for the larger development. And this is now including this initial phase and will also look to later phases as well. That has addressed comments also provided by the Conservation Authority. They do maintain with that stormwater management pond a setback to the floodplain, which is associated with the water course on the northern portion of the site. And as it relates to natural heritage features, they are maintaining a setback from the water course to meet the EIS environmental impact study requirements. As it relates to other concerns noted by the Conservation Authority, there were comments provided with respect to natural hazards, more specifically relating to the spill area, which is associated with that ditch line on High Street. And they are looking to provide a berm to ensure that that spill is located and contained within the ditch along the roadside. And they are looking to do a cut fill balance for a portion of Lot 1 that is actually in the floodplain of that water course. We did receive conditions of draft plan approval from various agencies and the town, which we have included in draft with your agenda. Included with those are conditions provided by the Blue Water District School Board. There was discussion at the previous public meeting that there was a desire for those conditions not to come back to this meeting. They are included here, and we can certainly, if there's a motion from this council, take that back to county with or without those conditions, all or part of them. I would also note that as of last week, we did receive formal comments from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. Included in the draft conditions was a holding condition to address any comments that the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation might provide. And in response to that, we did have a discussion with them on Friday morning. They are looking to revise that condition to provide a more specific and directed condition for the applicant to respond to as part of their detailed design work and consultation with the First Nation. That concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions there might be.
Thank you. So there is a recommendation that council provide direction to the County of Bruce Approval Authority to approve draft plan of subdivision S 2022-007 by Launch Property Group Incorporated, care of Brooks Turton, in accordance with the draft plan and conditions of draft approval attached. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by the Vice Deputy Mayor. Questions or comments? The Deputy Mayor. And then Grace.
Thank you. And through you, the school board condition, I think we need to be aggressive about not having that be part of this, because we need to send a message that schools need to be where people are, and whether the school board hears that or the province eventually hears it, I think that's a good message to relay. So I can appreciate in there's something about busing and all of that, but it's basically saying that, you know, if you live here, you might not get to go to the school that's right here. Well, I think we need to make a message that they should be able to go to the school that's right there. So I would like that condition removed.
If you want, just as a matter of process, that's condition 36. It's really 36A, which is the issue, including in all offers and purchase and sale, a statement advising prospective purchasers the accommodation within a school operated by the Blue Water District School Board may include temporary facilities, portable classroom, holding school, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really that item. I think it's come back here. I think staff would probably like specific direction by resolution from council to, we would be recommending to the Bruce County Approval Authority that item, or we would be requesting that the Bruce County Approval Authority remove that condition. I guess that I've framed that right, have I, Karina?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. And I would leave it to council whether they would want that removed specific to this file or for all future files as a direction to the county moving forward.
So if you want to, we could deal with that right now. If you want to frame up a resolution, don't have to write it. You could just, I think the resolution would essentially be that we request the Bruce County Approval Authority remove condition 36A from this draft plan of subdivision, and perhaps that they remove from all subsequent draft plans of subdivision that may come before them in the town of Saugeen Shores. Is that something you'd be willing to move? So the Deputy Mayor moves that, seconded by the Vice Deputy Mayor. On that particular question, is there any further discussion? I don't see any, so I'll ask all in favor of that. That's carried. I can't see Councillor Halpin, but it is carried one way or the other. So we'll frame that up. And all right, so back to the main question then. Further comments? I've got Grace next and then the Vice Deputy Mayor. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a question about the more recent comments, the letter from Son, and then Karina made a comment about having a meeting on June 16th with Son for a more defined holding condition, I think. Is that right?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. We did have a meeting with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and they are looking at rewording that condition to provide greater clarity to the applicant when they look to address those conditions.
Okay. So will we be informed when that is lifted or satisfied, or is that just going to be something that staff will get and then they can proceed with other?
Yes, through you,
actions?
Mr. Mayor. After this meeting, depending on the direction from this council, we would take a report to the county with that amended condition. And so the decision on that with the amended condition would be returned to staff at the town. And then through the resolution and finalization of those conditions, the applicant would be working with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation to satisfy that condition specifically.
Thank you.
The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know at the public hearing, we talked about a higher density development and we talked about townhouses, and I'll be supporting this recommendation. I think the developer's done a good job, and I read that statement. It talks about the applicant's consulting engineer advised against townhouses, as they would require the previously serviced Grenville Street to be dug up in order to install additional servicing connections. And I understand that, and it makes perfect good sense. I really do appreciate the fact they've added 2 secondary dwelling suites and a third demo unit. I think it's a demonstration unit, if I forget the right term here, but so I think they've done a good job. I think they've listened, and I also like the talking about the constructing higher density housing in the remaining lands. I think is a good thing. So I think they listened at the last meeting, and that's all I think that's all I asked for as a member of council, that they take into consideration our thoughts, and that happened. So I think these are good changes. I'll be supporting this recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Are there further comments from members? I'll say I think that, what was there? Oh, sorry, Councilor Davinsky. You have to raise your hand up higher, John. There you go. Councilor Davinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I apologize. No, I wanted to follow up on Cheryl Grace's comment about SON and their concerns about not being informed going along. And if I could ask the county planner, you said you met on Friday, June 16th. And this is through you, Mr. Mayor. On Friday, June 16th, did the developer meet as well with SON at that time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we did have a meeting where what we're looking to do at the county is start regular meetings with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation to talk about priority files. And so that meeting did not include the proponent, but they had received the comments at that point in time.
Okay, so they've received the concern from the Saugeen First Nation about not being part and parcel of this. And although I support the development, I feel as if the Saugeen First Nation is being left out. And I don't know if the proponents can speak at this or not, but how do we find out?
I think, so if you look at the conditions of draft plan approval, condition number 37, that prior to development or site alteration, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Environmental Office confirm that its interests related to archaeological resource potential and natural heritage features in the plan area have been addressed. So if you approve the draft conditions as written, that condition is in there, which binds the applicant to receive that confirmation from the Environmental Office of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. So the consultation and confirmation are required. Is that good enough?
That's certainly good enough. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
No, absolutely. Further questions? Oh, Councillor Halpin.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. I noticed in your plans, they had a few options for the additional development after the front street has been done on Grenville. What guarantee do we have that, the one option shows several more just individual houses, and the other one shows sets of townhouses with different densities. Is a developer committed to building more townhouses, or could it end up being more single family units?
Yeah, so I think at this point, we're going to have to focus, Councillor Halpin, on the application that's before us. I think the applicant has heard clearly from you, and we'll hear from me in a moment how important those higher density developments are for us going forward. But I mean, in terms of the debate today, I think we should focus on that. But certainly your comments about a desire to see that are well taken, and the applicant has heard them. They're here in the room.
Thank you. That is my concern. I'm okay with this, and we do need more higher density building, and that's what I'm pushing for. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Further comments from members? I don't see any, and I will pick up on that. I think, I think as we look at this development holistically, include what we see here today in front of us with a couple of additional dwelling units, which is great. But more broadly, what is likely to come in the future, hopefully we've got a couple of examples of potential future options for this development in the other remaining lands. And some of those include some higher density options. And I think that's key. And I really, for myself, speaking only for myself, obviously, that would be what my preference to see that come back so that we can get that kind of density mix in that area of Southampton in the future. So anyway, I think that's really important, but I will support the draft plan as proposed here today. And I guess my one question, I suppose, directed to the planner back to that Saugeen Ojibwe Nation condition. So we got the letter from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which raises questions. I don't read in there a confirmation that their interests have been addressed. And so I wonder, with this, like, how do we set this up so that, you know, that we can get to the point where that is possible? Like, is it your view that it is within reach for the developer to get that confirmation from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation? I think that we want them to have that discussion, but they need to have a letter in hand saying we have signed off on this development before it can proceed, which is a high bar potentially. Or I guess my question is, do you anticipate that is something that's relatively close and that's achievable for the developer?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. My initial thought is that ideally, yes, we would want to see more of these concerns addressed earlier in the process, but to the applicant's benefit, they did reach out to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation early, and they have entered into an agreement with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and they now also have those comments. Those would need to be addressed through the draft plan and through finalization of the detailed design. That may require amendments to the proposal, which would potentially require a red line revision to the draft plan. That is something that the applicant will need to be aware of as they move forward. But for the 9 lots that are proposed and as part of that initial phase, that does not look to be a concern for the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. It is more so that future development block and what happens on those lands that they would have more interest in. And to the applicant, I would recommend that they reach out to SON in the next week or so, just to confirm how they would like to proceed.
Yeah, and I'm very hopeful. I'm very glad that Bruce County is setting up routine discussions with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation on these issues, because what we really need to make this work is a process, a defined process that the municipality and the First Nation can agree on based on some defined criteria, so that folks understand what the criteria for getting an approval will look like, and so that they can make their way through in a logical way to an approval. What we don't want to set up is some process that folks don't know how to get through, right? So anyway, hopefully your work on that will lead to some positive outcomes. Very key. It's positive to see the First Nation and their issues highlighted in this draft plan in this way. So if there's nothing further, you've heard the resolution, and I'll ask all in favor.
In favor.
Thank you. That's carried. Okay, so now we are on to the staff report on design guidelines for existing neighborhoods and supervised development services.
Yes, thank you. And we've also got Andrea Sinclair from MHPC to help walk us through the presentation. But I do want to report that back in April, the town hosted a virtual open house to receive input from the public on the design guidelines, and more than 60 people attended. I didn't get the final count, but I was able to confirm at least 60. During the open house, we did receive comments on the range of topics as outlined below. And what we've done is we've taken the feedback that was also received till the end of April and considered it. And so we've done a couple things. We've developed a question and answer document that helps address a lot of the concerns, and a lot of them that came up and from that list aren't ones that required changes to the guidelines. In fact, it was helpful as an educational opportunity to inform community about some of the tools that already exist. So for example, we already have policies related to universal design in the guidelines. We also are in the guidelines looking at mixed use development. it was also an opportunity to talk about some of the other actions the town is undertaking in its business plan. So just a good, strong acknowledgement that we need to continue the work related to developing the urban tree canopy plan, for example. But it was also an opportunity to reevaluate this within the context of a greater program to look at design from in a range of topics. And so, and that's, I think, part of how we express the small town charm, that we need to have other tools in other parts of the community and other parts of the town that can be developed. And so developing those tools is, in this covering report just says that we want to bring forward a plan to develop further guidelines. And so with that, I turn it over to Andrea to walk us through the guideline presentation and then open it to anyone on council.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, we hear you.
Great. Thank you. I will just share screen. Just give me one sec here. Used to having my two screens and I don't tonight. So, okay. So thank you, Jay, for the introduction, and agreed. The comments that came through, I think in part, solidified some of the things that we had already included in the guidelines were things that were important to the community, and also reconfirmed that other initiatives already underway by the town are things that are very important to the community. So I think the feedback we received during that public meeting, but as well as all the emails and additional written feedback we received, has been helpful to this document, but also helpful in the town establishing sort of the direction to go going forward. So I just have a very brief presentation, and then I'm here to answer any questions. In terms of the timeline of this project, it was initiated late last year in November. We worked through what the terms of reference would be and established that really the key consideration would be guidelines for development within the existing built up areas or the existing neighborhoods. In January, I spoke to all of you at a brief council meeting just to introduce the initial project. As Jay mentioned, we had a public meeting in April, and since that meeting, we've been reviewing all the comments and feedback, have updated the guidelines, and have prepared the response document that's in your program today. So we're pleased to be presenting you with a final draft tonight. I think it concludes everything that the town was hoping to see in this, but as well incorporates a lot of information, additional things as a fallout from what we heard from the public. Just a quick kind of overview on why the initiative was started to do guidelines for existing neighborhoods is there is an increased demand for alternative forms of housing. There's a need for more affordable forms of housing and different types of tenure. So not just ownership, but rental. There is a desire to support housing diversification and intensification. And this is a key thing in a way that's compatible within the existing communities. And a need to have a document that would help guide development in a way that recognizes the small town charm of Saugeen Shores. The notion of small town charm came up several times during public meetings, but also in written correspondence. And we've tried to really identify some of those components in the guideline document. And it's not to say that preserving that small town charm means no change, but it's making sure that change happens in a way that still respects those things that make your town so special. And in listening to the earlier applications tonight, for example, the notion of all the landscaping, that's something that we recognized as one of the key elements, is just the amount of landscaping and open space in the town, and making sure there's strong guidelines to having sufficient amount of open space, landscaping, outdoor amenity. That's something I think coming out of the pandemic, especially, that's important, is people need to have that outdoor space. And I think that is something that these guidelines provide very strong direction towards. Again, in terms of small town charm, it was the feeling of friendly people, safe neighborhoods, and the ability to walk to the various amenities, including the waterfront and parks and schools and shops. It's not to say that everything will be replicating what's there today, but there's a lot of cues we can take both in built form and in landscaping, and use that to inform development going forward. Again, some of the things we note in the guidelines that's important is having tree-lined streets with mature vegetation. Trees and street trees and mature vegetation came up as a constant theme in all the comments we received. So the urban tree canopy project that's happening right now will be an important document going forward, as well as any tree bylaw that comes out of that. Use of natural materials. And then another one, which I really notice when I compare it to other communities, is sort of the more informal property delineation. So you don't see a lot of those 6 foot tall solid wood privacy fences. Property lines are often established more with landscaping or low profile fencing, pedestrian scale lighting, those things that really lend to that small town charm. In terms of ways that new development can complement the existing small town charm, so again, maintaining any mature vegetation, planting new trees along, especially along frontages, having that streetscape is really important. Looking at the specific context of where property is located and respecting things like these existing setbacks along the street and existing development patterns. So what may make sense in one area of the town may not be appropriate elsewhere. Encouraging natural materials, low profile fencing, and encouraging building materials and styles that are found within the surrounding context. One of the other things that I think came through the public meeting is a bit of concern that with these guidelines, we're going to see the full span of intensification everywhere in the town. That's really not the intent. There may be some areas where it's going to be appropriate to have additional dwelling units or basement apartments. There could be other areas where you see renovations to add an additional unit. And then there may be areas of the town where it's appropriate to have something larger scale like apartments, more closer to the downtowns and where there's amenities. So it wasn't intended that these guidelines are allowing everything to happen everywhere. There's still other tools like the official plan and the zoning bylaws that are going to determine kind of where various forms of housing are meant to be located. In terms of the response document that you have in your package, we sort of generalized most of the comments into falling into a few themes. So character and small town charm, the distinction of the beach communities and recognizing those as different from maybe other places in the town, what types and levels of intensification are appropriate where, the need for affordable housing, universal or barrier-free design, the importance of walkability and active transportation and locating intensification in areas where you can walk to some of the various amenities and existing services, dealing with parking in an appropriate way. That also came through in the discussion about the earlier application tonight. And then again, landscaping and trees. In terms of our recommendations, it's that these guidelines form part one of a series of guidelines and some of the additional guidelines that the town may want to consider. And again, this comes largely from the types of comments we received through the process is it may be appropriate to have separate guidelines for your greenfield or new neighborhoods, that the town could look at something like a node and corridor study that focuses on where are the key areas in the town where you expect to see a greater level of intensification. And then if there's guidelines in place for commercial areas, we heard a lot of comments about some of the newer commercial areas, and it didn't really fit within this document, but it may be something for the town to look at in the future. And then coming out of the urban tree canopy project, that a tree bylaw be prepared, that your zoning bylaws can be updated to include specific design direction. One of those may be regulations related to garage projections. The other would be to review your landscape open space requirements. And that lastly, that the official plan be updated to provide reference to specific town guidelines, which gives these a little bit stronger weight in terms of implementation. So that's just my brief overview. Again, happy to answer questions of council, and thank you for your time this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. So there is a recommendation that council adopt design guideline 1, existing neighborhoods. Is there a mover and seconder for that? We'll take Councillor Myatt and Councillor Davinsky. I should apologize too. When I started this topic, I introduced somebody who doesn't exist, the supervisor of development services. It's actually the manager of planning and development that we have in the room. So my apologies for that. Are there questions or comments from members? We'll start with the deputy mayor, then come to Councillor Grace.
Thank you. This is a really interesting document, and I participated in the public meeting, and a lot of what was said has been picked up, so that's a good thing. I also like that throughout the document, it often references a pedestrian scaled approach or orientation, and also the value, the incredible value of landscaping. I just want to recognize that two developers are still sitting here in the chambers, and when she got to the end and listed off the potential for additional documents in the series, one was downtown and one was residential greenfields. Well, the two developments that have just sort of floated by us, one was on a greenfield area and one is in a downtown area. But I hope that I appreciate that they're still in the room, and hopefully it was because they wanted to hear about this presentation and what it's intended to do, because some of the comments and ideas and direction and hopes within this document apply to both of their developments, even though they might fit into a different line in the series. And in one case, one of the developers has already started to create a new neighborhood because they've already done some building. I'm talking about along Grenville Street. And whatever we can do to, however you define small town charm, whatever we can do to encourage that to remain and to be created in newer areas, that's a great thing. I do have some housekeeping kind of typo corrections, and maybe I'll send them along afterwards. One being that it's Southampton, all one word, not Southampton yet. But I did want to ask one question. Throughout the document, there's references to planning staff doing something. And I guess for the public's benefit, I just wanted to have somebody clarify that the planning staff we're talking here would be our own planning staff. This is not Bruce County Planning, or is it a combination kind of activity that would hopefully get some of these very good ideas sort of flowing through the process? As planning staff is mentioned at a few intervals, who are we talking about? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to answer that. Does include the county. I think the idea is that it's a colloquial term to include just that there's a function of the government to look at these guidelines and inform developers in the community about what they are. So it's not just me, it's me plus the town, our own town, plus our county planners as well.
Okay, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation, and thanks to our staff also for working on this. I'm really happy to see this report for a number of reasons. We talk a lot about small town charm, small town character. What this report does is to give us some specific attributes that would help to define what that means and what people are already doing, developers and people who are building single houses or developments like townhouses. We see a lot of examples of that. So I'm happy about that. I'm happy about the emphasis on the retention of environmental features. The greater emphasis on ensuring that existing vegetation is better maintained, the use of native species for landscaping. All of those are really positive features. The tree-lined streets with mature vegetation, a great thing to be aspiring to and to try to protect. I have a question though. This was a comment at several points in the presentation about the fact that our properties are very often, and that this is a good thing, demarcated by low profile, sometimes fencing, but more often vegetation, and that we don't have a whole bunch of high fences separating our properties, which I think is a great thing. But we don't have a fence bylaw. And I've often thought that it would be a good thing for us to consider looking at a fence bylaw. So I guess my question is for Jay or Mark. What about that? What about a fence bylaw?
Well, I don't have any, pithy answer other than it's certainly, any input you have, we'll certainly consider it. We do regulate fences in parts of the town. It's just not what I'm thinking you're thinking is about having a sort of a maximum envelope of what a fence would be.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of some examples where people have built 6-foot high fences, for, well, I think I know the reason why, but it wasn't perceived as being a neighborly thing to do. And I'm not quite sure I understood the reason why. And I'm just wondering, I'd like us to look at that. And I know you've got a lot on your plate, but maybe something for the future.
Okay, thank you. Further comments, Councilor Davinsky.
In conjunction with that, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I do have a tree-lined boundary line at my place, and it's wonderful. It's a cedar bush, and it just does the trick, and it just warms the whole place up rather than a antiseptic type of fencing that we can see in certain areas nowadays. But having said that, a bylaw about fencing, it was mentioned in this report, and thank you for the report, a bylaw regarding trees. Do we have anything like that through you to Jay? Are we thinking of it? I know it's been brought up before.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's a good question. And it's always, good to emphasize that our business plan includes an urban tree canopy plan. And one of the outcomes is consideration of a tree cutting bylaw. That was a recommendation of the ESAC committee to consider that. And it's something that we'll be working on hopefully in the next couple months to get going. And pretty excited to bring that forward for consultation as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Further comments from members? But if you're still there, I can't see you. So if you have a comment, make sure to speak up.
I do, Mayor.
Okay, there you go. Councilor Halpin.
First of all, I apologize to everyone for the computer troubles I'm having, but they're beyond what I can control right now. I'm glad to see this report come through, and I really feel we're doing a good job of listening to people. We're getting input. I think that a plan like this is going to allay a lot of fears for people about how much our community is changing and how quickly that it is changing. And I'm really looking forward to that tree bylaw, the urban tree canopy, and it was mentioned so many times in that report. So I just want to say that I'm grateful for this report. It has my full support, and it's pointing us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I also am in favor of this report. I think it was very well done, and I appreciate the hard work that was put into it. One of the things that I really appreciated was the fact that it identifies and in fact highlights the necessity of diversity of housing styles. Small town charm, people think of the Victorian style house with the big front porch and the columns. But some people like the Frank Lloyd Wright designs as well. And there can be opportunities, and I think there's pictures in here as well that reflect that different styles of architecture amongst one another is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't ruin the street. It just gives a variety. So I think myself, I'm a big one for variety. And so I like the guidelines. And as Councillor Gray said, it gives us something to fall back on instead of just being a concept that we rely on and we refer to. We have something that we can actually refer to in writing and in photos, and I think it'll serve us and future councils well going forward. So thank you for bringing it.
Okay, further comments from members? Councillor Stack.
Thanks. I'm just going to reiterate what I said during the public session. I guess a couple of things. I think it was articulated. we talked about a fear of change. I don't know that we necessarily have to fear a change. There's a lot of good things that come with growth, a lot of economic opportunity, a lot of new families bringing an interesting and diverse way of living. I think I've made this comment before, cautious about what small town charm means. And there's a lot of advantages to being a less than small town, that I think, I don't think we can underplay the value and benefit that comes with that. And then I think it was kind of highlighted already that this offers an opportunity, not only a diversity of housing, but, I would say more specifically, economic diversity of housing. So perhaps we can do some more affordable housing in a style and look that's less, that causes people a little less consternation. So when I look at the advice provided, or the guidance, provided in the report, I think that's what sort of provides some interest to me, that perhaps they'll give us some better opportunity to get people comfortable with some of the advantages of affordable housing across the community rather than in specific pockets and at the outskirts. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, intensification, the point of this exercise is for us to enable us to do intensification, because intensification is good policy. It's good housing policy. It's good environmental policy. It's people, if you care about affordable housing, if you care about protecting the as yet undeveloped parts of this community, then you want intensification. And this guideline is designed to help us to be able to do intensification in a socially acceptable way, find ways to be able to put more people in the already developed parts of our community in a way that blends well with the existing neighborhoods. Does that mean that the buildings will look exactly as they did before? No, but if one drives up and down the streets of Southampton or Port Elgin or parts of Saugeen Township, you will see that housing styles have changed over the last 150 years, that you will have a house that was very common in 1875 right next to a house that was much more common in 1975. And those are very different styles because times change, and houses that are being built today are very different than those that were being built in 1975. None of those styles, there's no problem with any of them. They're all just a reflection of the era in which they were constructed, and that will continue to be the case. The key thing is, can we put the houses together so that the general streetscape is respected, and so that more people can live on that streetscape in a way that makes people feel at home in those streets in the way they always have. So I think that's the purpose of what we've done here. I think it's a good plan. It gives that outline. Hopefully we can find ways to get our development community involved in implementing it, whether that be at the zoning stage, the site plan stage, and although we have less teeth at the building permit stage as well, find ways to get those folks, because we really don't have a lot of influence over somebody at the building permit stage, but hopefully we can at least hand them the document and encourage them to follow it when they're seeking a building permit. And I feel like folks will do that because they want to make people want to make the community better. People who are building things, builders want to improve their communities and improve their streetscapes. So I hope we will get that buy-in. My one concern with the document is this. It's called Design Guideline 1, existing neighborhoods. I'm not sure when we got into more. It sounds like that's setting us up to do more things next. Council gave direction to create a set of urban intensification guidelines, which has been delivered. I don't know. I saw some recommendations about future plans and studies we may do, but council really a choice that council will have to make at some point in the future. I really don't want to put right in the title of this document that we're going to do a bunch more here. What we needed, most importantly, most critically, is an urban intensification guideline. We have created that guideline. If more is needed, then we will hear from our staff and we can debate that. I would rather this document be called the Saugeen Shores Urban Intensification Guideline. I don't know if that's a change that you guys can make, but I think that would make it much clearer too, because right now, who knows what that means? I don't know what Design Guideline 1 existing neighborhoods even means. So can we make that change?
You can retitle it whatever makes it useful. And I think the idea is, without putting too much pressure on council, is that the town would benefit from future guidelines. It's the only intention by numbering it.
Sure. Yeah, and we can have those discussions later, but we don't know that there's going to be a number 2, so we won't call this one number 1. All right. So can I change the resolution, Maya Davinsky, that council adopt the urban intensification guidelines?
Mr. Mayor, this is the CAO. I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
I can hear. I'm not sure I'm going to want to hear you, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. My
I'm
apologies.
sorry.
Yeah.
That was just a joke, Kara. I'm just
Okay.
kidding.
Sorry, my apologies. I just would recommend using the title existing neighborhoods design guidelines. I'm not sure what's
Okay.
meant by urban intensification, so I would just offer that for your consideration.
Existing neighborhood. What was that? Repeat that language to me.
Existing neighborhoods design guidelines.
Okay. Yeah. Existing neighborhoods guidelines, but intensification, right? Oh, design guidelines. All right. Okay. Okay. Are you guys okay with that? Mayette Davinsky. So the resolution would read that council adopt the urban existing neighborhoods design guidelines. Okay. Okay. So if there's no further discussion, then all in favor?
In favor.
Thank you. That's carried. Okay. So now we will move on to item number. Oh, sure. Okay. The director is getting his computer running again, but we are moving on to the staff report on the municipal housing allowance. And when he's ready, we'll turn over to the director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item executes on an initiative approved in the 2023 business plan to supplement funding of the county's municipal housing allowance program, which is in addition to the county's rent supplement program. The recommendation seeks direction for the Director of Development Services to enter into an agreement with the county. And the main features of the draft agreement, which is included as item 12.3 in the agenda, the main points are that it would transfer $75,000 to the county. The time frame is for 1 year. Saugeen Shores clients benefiting from the town's supplemental funding would be identified after the county has established the program clients, including Saugeen Shores clients, first. This would add 10 clients from Saugeen Shores that would receive lump sum payments of about $590 per month. And the agreement or memorandum of understanding provides for the county to prepare quarterly reports that would set out for council the number of town clients and the funds spent. So that's the main remarks I wanted to make, Mr. Mayor, on the report, and happy to hear any questions if there are some.
Sure. So there is a recommendation that council adopt a bylaw to authorize the Director of Development Services to enter into an agreement with the County of Bruce to transfer funds to the county to supplement the municipal housing allowance program. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the Vice Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor Grace. Okay, questions or comments? Vice Deputy Mayor and then Grace.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mark, thanks for this report. And it's great news. The application wait list at the county for Saugeen Shores is, I think, over 400 now. And just moves it down to 390. And another 10 units from the county would be 380. And we're making some, there's some baby steps there. But I just wanted to make comment. I'll just pull it up here. And there's one good thing in here you've said, and I know you and I talked about this on several occasions, and that is that, in addition to the rent program through the county, you talked about the eligible household units in the town will be included in the county-wide allocation in the same manner as if the supplementary town funding did not exist. And we've talked about that, Mark, and that don't penalize us. I mean, we're putting in that $75,000. Probably the first municipality in all of Bruce County has done such a thing, I'm assuming. I think that assumption would be correct. And hopefully we can see our way to $75,000 the next 2 years. But don't penalize us for that. And you put it in there with the agreement coming up 5 pages. I'll be supporting it as well. It's a really good memorandum of understanding. And I think these are really good first steps towards moving people off the application wait list and get that down to zero someday. So thank you, Mark. It's a really good report and humble beginning. But 20 units is 20 units, right? So thanks for your good work.
Thank you, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mark, for your work on this and helping to construct this policy to follow our commitment in the budget to this support. Being able to support an additional 10 households in Saugeen Shores, that's very powerful. May seem small, but it's a powerful step, and you know, I like that. In terms of the one of the confirmation of eligibility, it says the county will track tenants' civic addresses 3 different times over that period of time that they're getting this money. Is that something that, I mean, it shouldn't be a very onerous task, should it, to do that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's my understanding that that would be fairly routine.
This is something they do anyway, is what you're saying? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, for the comments, Councilor Dominski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mark Polly. First of all, this is a wonderful report, and it's, as Councillor Grace says, it's small, but to those that it affects, it's huge. And it could be the difference between turning everything around and just giving up in despair. But the one thing I wondered about is the $590 a month to households to support the achieving housing stability. Once they're in, are they in there for a set period of time or for as long as they need to be in that program?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I'll defer this one to Jay, who might have a better handle on the program details in that regard.
Yeah, certainly, if you're looking for a lot of nuance, I may not have it the same as the County of Bruce housing, but there are eligibility requirements that in the county's normal auditing. One of them is the geographic location, so you'd have to be in Saugeen Shores. But there's also income limits, and they're really targeting minimum wage earners. So if you hit the job, say we're able to be fortunate enough to work for the town, you may not qualify. So we're really the county's really targeting those minimum wage earners.
Okay, so it's not something that says you're in now and it's going to close, it's going to end a year from now.
No, I understand that the county checks on the eligibility requirements.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, of course, it will be important for this council to maintain its funding year in and year out in order for folks, we have to continue to pay for it for folks to be able to continue to receive the subsidies. So that's a matter for us to remember as we do our annual budgets. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
But just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, when we approved that $75,000 in this year's budget 2023, so I'm not billed into the tax levy, so that's in there every year. That's 75 grand.
Yes, it is. But of course, council always has the power to cancel or stop funding anything.
I understand.
So
But-
council has to remember not to do that.
Okay, but it's in there.
Yeah. Are there further comments or questions? I think this is a good arrangement for us because we provide cash and we use the expertise and structure of the County of Bruce, which is already doing this and well positioned to do it. The Human Services Department at the County of Bruce is an outstanding department with people who are in touch with folks who have this need, can evaluate their need, and are helping them in a whole array of different ways. And this is just one way in which they're providing assistance. We can support that program with money, which makes that program do more. And hopefully, as the Vice Deputy Mayor has said, we'll increase that funding over time. If Saugeen Shores becomes a community where we have the rental units available and where rental subsidies are available to people most in need, we will become a location of choice for people who we need in our community. People like folks who will work in the service sector, folks who will work in our long-term care homes, folks who will work in our hospitals, people who are unfortunately in many cases lower wage earners in our community, but people who we need to live here. And so it's good social policy, but it's also a good economic development policy, good policy in terms of making sure that our community has a competitive edge when it comes to attracting people who we need to live here. So I think we're on the right track with this, and I hope that we'll continue to step up the funding support so we can take that from the 10 to 20 to 30. And as you start to build on that, you really are doing something pretty important. So good work too, I might add, to our staff for structuring this. It's the first time, as the Vice Deputy Mayor rightly pointed out, no other municipality lower tier is doing this. It has not been done. So our staff and county staff have done great work envisioning this and setting something up that I think will be quite successful. So you've heard the recommendation. I'll ask all in favor.
In favor.
That's carried. That's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we're on to the fifth staff report, which is on the provincial planning statement and the manager of planning and development.
Yes, thank you. Just a brief introduction. The province continues to make changes to the planning system. And in this consultation, the province seeks comments on the provincial planning statement, which outlines provincial policy direction on land use planning. County of Bruce has submitted comments which generally align with the town's perspective related to the proposed changes. And so you're aware, Jack Van Dorp, manager of planning at the county, is here to help answer questions throughout this discussion if you have any.
Well, that's great. It's good of Jack to be here. So there is a recommendation that council endorse the County of Bruce comments on the ERO posting 019-6813 with respect to the proposed provincial planning statement changes. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Grace, seconded by Davinsky. Questions or comments? The Deputy Mayor and then Grace.
Thank you. Through you. I found the comments from the county. Well, when I read the document, the proposed provincial planning statement document, I had a little excitement every now and again because I thought this is pretty cool. This will be good. You know, the idea of strategic growth areas and coming up with different kinds of mapping. And then when I got to the county comments, I sort of started to think maybe all those things that I thought were pretty cool don't relate to us. So I would ask at some point that there be some sort of highlights that come out that are more specific to our community, because there is some confusion between, you know, the size of a community. And at first when I thought, oh, I wonder if we made the fastest growing list, because we are a fast growing area and a fast growing community. And definitely within Bruce County, we are. But of course, they're talking about much more populated urban areas closer to the GTA. So there were places where I thought, oh, that would be a good thing to apply here, but then it doesn't appear to. So I was struggling with coming up with the balance of what this means for us. There's lots of references to mapping too, that once something makes its way through the channels, I would respectfully ask that some of the maps that are being talked about, that we get those maps. So there's a new mapping for your community that shows the settlement area, the rural areas, and prime agricultural lands, that we get updated maps so that, you know, we have a sense of where everything fits in. Two things that jumped out at me. 3.7 in the provincial policy statement document is about waste management. They allocated one sentence to that. And I'm sure it's because it shows up in a lot of other provincial areas. Waste management is incredibly significant. You know, we've recently had reports here about the length of time associated with the landfill and the need to expand that, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, it certainly concerns me that we've done a good job here, and we're hopefully going to do a good job going forward to ensure that we have capacity here for our residents. But the fact that it gets a one sentence mention in here without it needs to be planned for and provided that there are of a appropriate size, type, and location to accommodate present and future requirements and facilitate integrated waste management. I was hoping for more there, because it's a very big topic. The other one that kind of caught my eye was the heritage section, which the language moves from lots of ways that we have influence or opportunities to more about protected properties. And it seems to be that those properties have to be designated. And so I think the Heritage Committee, of which I'm an alternate member, and Councillor Grace chairs, and Councillor Halpin is a member of that as well. I do hope that council will accept some information from the Heritage Committee going forward about any possible way we have to influence the protection of resources within our community, because it really seems like the language is making it so that there has to be an awful lot of process involved to make sure that a property is protected. But I hope that there's other ways that we can influence the way that heritage is retained and celebrated in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am impressed with the county's report. It's detailed, very thoughtful. I find the direction of the province's proposed amendments to be disheartening. Just some highlights of my concern. And this is something I'm sure that concerns the agricultural community. Allowing up to 3 new residential lots on any farm parcel that existed as of January 1st, 2023. The county contends that will result in a loss of agricultural land and put other pressures upon farmers. One of the, it talks about the fact that Bruce County staff estimate that full implementation of this policy could introduce almost 15,000 residential lots and remove approximately 29,400 acres of prime agricultural land, not to mention putting other pressures upon farmers in terms of just having people build residential homes in the middle of or adjacent to a farming operation. Removal of planning tools such as affordability targets and intensification and density targets will make it much harder for municipalities to provide affordable and attainable housing. In fact, affordable, as in affordable housing, is only mentioned twice in the whole provincial report, and attainable housing isn't mentioned at all, which is curious since Bill 23's purpose was supposed to be to build more housing faster. Presumably more housing to meet the needs of people who need housing. The removal of settlement areas like towns, villages, and hamlets as the focus of growth. The county contends that this has the potential to undermine the vitality of these settlement areas while encouraging residential sprawl into agricultural areas. Changing the language in some places, particularly as pertains to affordable housing, from shall to should, which weakens a municipality's or could weaken a municipality's ability to require affordable housing inclusion in plans, development plans. A lack of clarity of municipal responsibility for drinking water sources, this is especially important since the Ontario Safe Drinking Water Act of 2002 established such a high standard of duty for municipal councils and staff. This is really something that should be on our radar. The deputy mayor has already talked about the issue about changes to the Ontario Heritage Act as outlined in Bill 23. And as she mentioned, our Heritage Committee is working hard on that, but the county raised objections in this paper to that as well. They also talked about the ability for to have minister's zoning orders, which allows the minister to issue orders that don't comply with the provincial policy statement or the Planning Act, while municipalities must be consistent with those two documents. So I wholeheartedly support the county's comments and staff's recommendation to endorse. Thanks.
Thank you for the comments. Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. A couple of the areas that stood out to me, a couple have already been addressed, but I'm going to take a little different course on the one, especially when it comes to the agriculture. And certainly there's some staggering figures here that says we're 319 acres of farmland are lost per day in Ontario. And we only make up 5% of Ontario's land base is agriculture. But I think adding the opportunity for adding 3 new residential lots per farm parcel is something that that really has some merit to it. And I don't think any farmer, certainly any production farmer, is going to carve out an acre or 2 out of the front of his most productive field. It makes a barrier for him to farm around, and it just doesn't make sense to take that land out of production. But there's plenty of parcels on farms that are not as productive, or that may have a natural separation, a creek or a ditch or something that, or it makes perfect sense to be able to sever off a lot and allow people to build their dream home in the country. It's not everybody that wants to be in a subdivision. Not everybody wants to be on lighted streets and paved sidewalks. There's lots of people that prefer the more country lifestyle. And in fact, where you have a lot large enough, what it does is it encourages small scale farming. So people get into hobby farming and things like that. And there's no greater satisfaction, as I'm sure some around the table can agree, than producing your own food. So I think to take a hard stance on that is something that should be reconsidered by the county, as it provides a income stream for people in the agricultural industry, where they might have the opportunity to carve off a less productive piece of land, and at the same time allow somebody to have their dream of living in the country. Because otherwise, what we do is we force people who don't want to necessarily be on a standard sized lot in town to build in areas that are less desirable. One that comes to mind is in Burgoyne. I know people that have built houses in Burgoyne, and it's hard to think of a worse place to build a house because the water is so bad. You can't get good water in that town. And that's just an example of people, chasing their dream, and they're forced into a less desirable location, whereas this might provide the opportunity for people to do the opposite and be where they want to be. And the other area that I drew my attention was with regards to the municipal boundary revisions. And currently we require a public review in order for municipal boundaries to be expanded. And in this area, I agree with the municipality, or with the county, that we should retain that public input, because it's a big deal when boundaries get redrawn. It was just a couple of years ago that I was advocating that the Port Elgin and Saugeen ward boundaries should be reconsidered for redrawing. And that was mainly because of the divide between Wisteria Power and Hydro One. It's well known that Hydro One has a little bit lower rate on power than Hydro One customers do. And so you have situations where people who are living across the street from each other are paying different rates for the hydro. So I still think it's a important thing that we need to consider carefully when we redraw those boundaries. Not only does it change the services and utilities, but it also changes the electoral boundaries, which my ward is getting bigger and in the population wise, and although it is still the smallest ward in the municipality. So those are the two things that came to mind. But other than that, I think the report speaks for itself, and I agree with almost all except for the agricultural section in the Bruce County's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further comments from members? Councillor Stack?
Yeah, so I'll be supporting the report. And I think, probably not. When I review some of the issues raised, I think it speaks to a challenge with how our provincial government is choosing to manage planning. And, our minister, our MPP, I just to double check her portfolio as Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And I would argue for an MPP of a rural region, there's not enough advocacy here for some of the challenges that these planning changes are made. And I think we should be, expressing our disappointment with some of the decisions this provincial government has made and it continues to make on these types of issues, whether it's, planning, healthcare, education. There are a lot of challenges that are particularly acute challenges for smaller communities like ours. And, I couldn't support more any challenge to these types of decisions from our current government.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Davinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Listening to all the comments, I agree with all of them, but I would, through you, like to ask Jack a question. Bruce County has put this together, and I've commented on this before, so people know my thinking. Is this really going to make a difference with the provincial government, which to me has blinders on and is thinking only of the large municipalities as far as this particular document goes? Jack, any comments?
Thank you, Councillor Davinsky, and through the mayor, I would offer that so Bruce County has worked to prepare this, and there was some discussion with other municipalities in the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus and planning directors across Ontario in preparing some of the methodology and the numbers with respect to the agricultural consents information, for example. So through that information and the comments of the commodity groups, agricultural commodity groups coming together, the Minister of Municipal Affairs did advise that they were going to be revising their direction with respect to the mandatory lot creation policies, and instead looking to make sure that they were meeting their intention, which was to provide opportunities for succession planning in agriculture and jobs for farm workers, housing for workers on farms, as I should say. So I would say, the collective efforts together have had some impact in respect of that agricultural policy. And so that's why we continue to put in the effort with the province, and also to support awareness amongst our municipal and community partners around the changes that are proposed from the province.
Hey, thank you, Jack. And that's good to hear. That's encouraging. We have to do more of that, because they have to know that we're here, and we are the fastest growing community in Bruce County, and it makes a difference. And they have to they, meaning the provincial government, has to realize that there is much that can be done in the bigger centers that would be devastating to me for the smaller centers. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and through you, one of the comments in the county's response very specifically recognizes the value of conservation authorities, and it picks up on throughout the provincial policy statement. There's references to municipalities or upper tier communities doing watershed type work, and so the county, I appreciate, I suspect many of us do, that they've said, hey, there's already people doing that. They're called conservation authorities, and put that recognition there. One of the other elements that's in there that is specific to us and does bring in the conservation authority is there's many references to shoreline situations, and it specifically includes in the PPS a comment about creating mapping that puts a hazard limit in place plus a dynamic beach allowance. And that's the kind of thing that we've counted on conservation authorities to do. And it's a changing line every now and again, but it has been the hazard limit is pretty set. But I think it's good to reflect that there's value in conservation authorities, and I appreciate that the county is choosing to add that in. Thank you.
Further comments? So just a couple of things from me. One, I think it's worth noting, as sort of follow up on Councillor Stacks and Davinsky's comments, and Jack just pointed out some of the changes the province is already considering as a result of the public input. And it should be noted just in the context of this discussion that those changes to the agricultural proposals in here came about also in large measure due to the advocacy of the Minister of Agriculture, MPP Lisa Thompson. So there was a great deal of advocacy going on, which I have been following and aware of from the minister. So I think that's worth noting. And also worth noting, I think it's a positive thing that the province has in this case, you'll recall late last year, they were doing consultation. Well, I think it was on Bill 23. I can't remember. There's been so many of them. I can't remember which bill it was, where they actually had a comment period and then partway through the commenting period went ahead and passed the legislation, essentially truncating the comment period. In this case, due to what the feedback they're receiving from municipalities, commodity groups, their own caucus, I'm sure they have extended the comment period, which is why this is before us. Because actually it wouldn't have, the timing wouldn't have worked out. It wouldn't have been able to come to council because it had originally been scheduled to end a couple of weeks ago. And so now it's been extended out several weeks. So that's giving us more opportunity to comment and have that feedback. And as Jack pointed out, it's creating opportunities to meaningfully impact or influence the government on this legislation. So there are some areas of concern in here remaining for sure. The county's laid it out. I would say that this Bruce County Council itself was quite unanimous on these recommendations. So these are fairly strong. This is strongly supported at the political level, at least at the county. But it's also worth noting that there are some things that I find positive about the PPS changes in terms of its overall thought process around encouraging local control. I think that there's areas where the province has said, that shift from should to shall can be viewed as a negative thing in a way, but it can also be viewed as a positive, or shall to should, I should say, because I think the motivation behind it is to offer flexibility to municipalities to do different things perhaps, and not to be quite so prescriptive at the provincial level. So I think from a motivation standpoint, I see some positive things from the province. Obviously, I'm concerned about several things about the PPS changes, and that's my views are reflected in these recommendations. The other thing I would just point out, the one impact of this, which council should know, these changes to the PPS, I believe, are expected to take effect in the fall sometime. The province is considering final adoption this fall. That has created a problem for the county in terms of its official plan review process. And really, which the county's new official plan was expected to be adopted this year. That's almost certainly not going to happen. Probably the OP will be pushed out into 2024, the county OP. So that has a trickle down effect on all of our planning processes. The town is really waiting for the county's documents to be completed. So we're all just continuing, we're seeing that pushed out because of this disruption happening at the provincial level. So that's really just for your information. Anyway, you've heard the recommendation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick thing, kind of related to what you're saying. In the comments, there's a sort of bold yellow statement talking about natural heritage and how that natural heritage section has not been, it remains under consideration by the province. And we've been, in limbo on natural heritage at the county level for several years. And that also trickles down and affects us. So I know, just really for the public who is very concerned about that, just that is ongoing. And will we be separately updated on that once something comes down from the province?
Well, if I may, I can defer to Jack because I think there's some new posting that he can describe. And certainly I don't know the timing, but we will endeavor to inform and give opportunity to council if the commenting period is sufficiently long enough. So, Mr. Mayor, if Jack can comment.
Yeah, Jack.
Thank you. And yes, the province did release draft natural heritage policies at I think about 3:45 on Friday afternoon. So they are very fresh. We haven't yet had an opportunity to take a deep dive into them and confirm how they might relate. Initial sense is there may not be a large amount of change from what is currently in the provincial policy statement. But we'll be looking to that and collaborating with Jay and your team, and then sharing out any materials that we would have that would help to inform council through its deliberations on comments. I believe the commenting period we have is to August 5th, so still not a lot of time, but looking to make sure that we can get that material to you.
Yeah, you have to have some sympathy for our planning staff. We've been working on this for, well, the Bruce GPS program was first initiated by Director of Planning and Development at the County Caravan Mile. So that gives you a sense of how long that has gone on. And now, I was involved sort of closely with the natural heritage system work that the county was doing a few years ago. And also an awful lot of work went into getting that to a point where it could be included in provisions of an official plan. And now the legislation changes and potentially a lot of that work put at risk and having to be revised. So it's an awful confusing time for our planning staff at Bruce County, and they're doing their very best to manage that and try to shepherd us through it. So for your work, Jack, and all your colleagues at Bruce County. If there's nothing further, you have heard the recommendation, so I'll ask all in favor.
In favor.
Thank you. That's carried. Okay, so now we're on to the bylaws. And there are 3 bylaws there for consideration. Anybody wish to have any of those drawn out for individual consideration? I don't see any. So there is a resolution that bylaws 53-2023, 54, 2023, and 55, 2023 are hereby read a first, second, and third time, finally passed and sealed this 19th day of June, 2023. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the Vice Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Mayette. All in favor?
In favor.
That is carried. And then I have a resolution that bylaw 56, 2023, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 19th day of June, 2023. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Davinsky. All in favor?
In favor.
That is carried. And finally, I have a resolution this regular council meeting of June 19th, 2023 hereby adjourns at 9:14 p.m. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Stack, seconded by Grace. All in favor?
In favor.
That is carried. And we're done. Have a good evening, everybody.